If there's one thing most people misunderstand about their own life, it's how important the years 20 to 30 actually are. This decade is treated like extra time before real life begins. But in reality, it's the phase that quietly shapes everything that comes after. These are the years where most people think delayed effort has no cost, and time will always wait for them. But nothing about this decade is casual. Every habit you form, every avoidance you repeat, every environment you stay in, and every choice you postpone becomes the blueprint of the life you will be forced to live later. Today we're going to break down why this decade is far more serious than it appears. We'll expose the illusion of time that makes your 20s feel harmless, the identity you're unconsciously building through small, repeated choices, and the momentum, good or bad, that will follow you for the rest of your life. This isn't about pressure, it's about awareness. Because the life you wake up to at 30 is already being built right now, whether you realize it or not. Welcome to Glitch Cult, where we bring attention to the moments you ignore because they feel too small to matter. Your 20s are the decade that trick you the most because they feel light, but carry the heaviest weight. This is the only phase in life where the seriousness is invisible. Nothing looks urgent. Nothing feels irreversible. Nothing seems like it could destroy your future. People around you keep saying you have time, and you start believing it without questioning what that really means. You think "I'm young" is a shield that protects you from consequences. But time doesn't operate the way you imagine. It doesn't warn you that you're drifting. It doesn't send an alert that you're delaying too much. And it doesn't tell you that every small decision is carrying a future cost. Time is passive. You lose it quietly, and by the time you realize it was valuable, it's already gone. That's why your 20s feel casual even when they're not. You can waste a day and nothing breaks. You can waste a week and nothing collapses. You can waste a year and still feel like life hasn't changed much. The problem is that you confuse slow consequences with no consequences. You don't see the damage being built because it doesn't show up instantly. You skip the habits that matter, and your life still feels normal. You avoid the uncomfortable things, and nothing punishes you yet. You drift, distract, postpone, and ignore. And the world lets you. And that's what makes this decade dangerous. Nothing stops you. Life doesn't interrupt you to tell you that the things you are ignoring now will become the exact reasons you feel stuck later. Your 20s are the only time where you can get away with bad choices without feeling their impact. And that illusion is what traps most people. You don't feel regret in your 20s because regret is a delayed emotion. It shows up much later, when your life becomes the result of years of choices you didn't take seriously. People think regret is caused by big events, but it's actually made of thousands of small moments where you chose comfort over progress. Every time you said, "I'll start later," you planted one more seed of regret. And because nothing bad happened immediately, you kept repeating it. You don't realize that regret grows quietly, like rust working on metal. It doesn't ruin anything in a day, but leave it long enough, and suddenly everything is weaker. Another reason your 20s feel casual is because society romanticizes confusion. People around you normalize drifting. They say things like, "Everyone is lost at this age. No one really has everything sorted out. You're still very young." And while there is truth in those statements, the problem is that people use them as excuses for inaction. Being lost is normal. Staying lost isn't. Experimenting is fine. Escaping responsibility isn't. Taking time to understand yourself is good. But letting years pass without direction is not. This decade gives you freedom, but freedom without awareness becomes self-destruction. You start treating your life casually, simply because no one else is pressuring you. But absence of pressure is not a sign of safety. It's a sign that responsibility has shifted entirely onto you. The illusion of time makes people think their 30s will magically sort things out. They imagine their future self as someone more disciplined, more intelligent, more focused, more stable. But that future self doesn't appear out of thin air. They are built by the choices you make now. If you don't build discipline in your 20s, you won't suddenly be disciplined later. If you don't build direction now, you won't wake up at 30 with clarity. If you don't build habits now, you won't suddenly become consistent later. Time doesn't give you better versions of yourself just because you got older. It only amplifies whatever you already are. If you are someone who avoids things in your 20s, you become someone who struggles in your 30s. If you're someone who builds slowly now, you become someone who grows steadily later. Your 20s don't feel serious because the world doesn't treat them like they matter. But your future will. Everything that feels small now becomes massive later. Everything that feels harmless now becomes defining later. And the saddest part is that you won't even realize how serious this decade was until you're looking at a life shaped entirely by decisions you barely remember making. Your 20s are the decade where your identity stops being something given to you and starts being something you create, whether consciously or accidentally. This is the first time in your life where nobody tells you what to do. There's no school timetable, no fixed curriculum, no teachers telling you what to study next, no structure forcing you to grow in a particular direction. And while this freedom looks exciting on the surface, is the exact thing that exposes who you truly are. Because when life stops pushing you, you either push yourself or you drift. But drifting doesn't feel like drifting at first. It feels like rest, it feels like a break, it feels like freedom. And that feeling is seductive enough to keep you unconscious while your identity forms around your habits, choices, and avoidances. What you tolerate in your 20s becomes your standard for life. If you tolerate people who drain you, you start believing that you deserve that type of relationship. If you tolerate friendships that distract you, you normalize that environment. If you tolerate jobs that don't challenge you, you begin to think your potential is limited. You don't see it happening because it doesn't happen in one moment. It happens through repeated acceptance. Identity is built through repetition. Every time you let someone waste your time, you quietly train yourself to place less value on your time. Every time you avoid a challenge, you quietly build a habit of walking away from growth. Every time you settle for comfort, you quietly become someone who fears discomfort. These patterns don't look serious when you're 20, but they define you when you're 30. This decade shapes your mindset more than any other phase in life. Your sense of worth, your confidence, your internal voice, your courage to take risks. These things are not gifts you get at 30. They're skills you build at 20. Your 20s are when you learn how to think for yourself. You learn how to trust your decisions. You learn how to fail and recover. You learn how to choose your environment. You learn what brings you peace and what destroys it. But if you spend these years sleeping through life, you don't build these skills. Instead, you build something else. Dependency. Dependency on other people to validate you. Dependency on external structure to hold you together. Dependency on distractions to avoid your thoughts. Dependency on comfort to escape your fear. Most people don't notice that their identity is forming because they mistake comfort for stability. They believe the people around them will improve later, but environments rarely change. It's the individual who must outgrow them. They think they'll adjust their habits later, but habits get stronger the longer they exist. They imagine they'll choose better relationships later, but standards shrink when you stay too long in places that don't respect you. Your identity is not shaped by big decisions. It's shaped by daily repetition. And this decade repeats more than you realize. Another hidden truth is that your 20s reveal your emotional blueprint. How you deal with stress, how you handle uncertainty, how you respond to setbacks, how you manage loneliness, how you cope with pressure. These responses become your emotional defaults. If your default response is avoidance, that becomes your life pattern. If your default response is distraction, that becomes your coping mechanism. If your default response is silence, that becomes the way you handle conflict. These emotional patterns become the lens through which you experience your 30s, 40s, and beyond. People assume identity is something you discover, like some hidden treasure waiting inside you. But identity is something you build. You build it intentionally or accidentally, but you build it either way. The tragedy is that most people don't build it intentionally. They let life shape them through whatever they allow, tolerate, and repeat. And when they reach 30, they look at themselves and wonder why they don't feel confident, why they feel stuck, why they feel directionless. The answer is simple but painful. Their 20s weren't spent becoming someone. They were spent avoiding becoming someone. Momentum is the most underrated force in life, and your 20s are where it begins, silently and slowly. People think success or failure is the result of one big decision, but it's not. It's the result of the momentum built over thousands of small choices. And the thing about momentum is that it doesn't care whether you build it consciously or unconsciously. It simply follows the direction you created. If you spend your 20s learning new skills, trying different things, making small improvements, taking small risks, and showing up even when it didn't feel like much, you build upward momentum. But if you spent your 20s avoiding discomfort, escaping into distractions, delaying progress, and repeating comfortable patterns, you build downward momentum. Both versions feel small in the moment. Neither feels life-changing at 22. But by 30, the difference is massive. Momentum works like gravity. Once it takes hold, it becomes 10 times harder to fight against. Someone who spent their 20s growing develops a natural pull toward better choices. Showing up becomes easier. Trying new things becomes second nature. Discipline becomes a habit rather than a struggle. They don't need motivation because they build a system that now pushes them forward automatically. On the other hand, someone who spent their 20s drowning in distractions develops a different pull. Avoidance becomes easier. Procrastination becomes instinctive. Doubt becomes stronger. Fear of failure grows. Their life becomes heavier. Not because they're incapable, but because the momentum they built pushes them downward. This decade is serious because it sets the tone for everything ahead. Your future isn't shaped by your dreams, it's shaped by your patterns. And patterns come from momentum. A person who consistently takes small actions becomes someone who naturally evolves. A person who consistently runs away becomes someone who naturally stagnates. And the saddest part is that both people think they're the same while they're in their 20s. They live similar looking lives on the surface. But behind the scenes, one is building a foundation while the other is building a trap. The momentum you build defines how you see yourself. If you spent your 20s proving to yourself that you can do hard things, your 30s will feel like a continuation of that growth. But if you spent your 20s proving to yourself that you avoid hard things, your 30s will feel like a continuation of that avoidance. This is why some people hit their 30s and suddenly feel overwhelmed by life. They never built the emotional or mental strength needed to handle the responsibilities that come with age. They didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because they never practiced being strong. Momentum also shapes your financial path. Small savings habits, small skills you develop, small risks you're willing to take. They compound massively later. Meanwhile, small financial mistakes, small impulsive decisions, small avoidances of skill building, they also compound. But in the opposite direction, money isn't just about income. It's about the habits you built long before you earned anything significant. And when it comes to relationships, momentum decides who you end up with. If you spend your 20s surrounding yourself with people who uplift you, challenge you, and push you, your standards rise. If you spend your 20s around people who distract you, drain you, and limit you, your standards shrink. By 30, your circle either elevates you or traps you. And that didn't start at 30. It started years earlier through the momentum of who you allowed into your life. Your 20s don't need grand transformations. They don't need dramatic breakthroughs. They just need consistency in the right direction. Because when you stack small improvements over years, you create a version of yourself that is nearly impossible to break. And when you stack small avoidances, you create a version of yourself that is nearly impossible to fix. Momentum doesn't ask for perfection, it only asks for movement. Because the direction you move today becomes the life you live tomorrow. In your 20s, whether you realize it or not, are the decade where that direction becomes permanent.